So you're playing Edge and you do a 10 pull, and while you don't get a 5-star, you do get 4-star Beidou. Now, what do you get with a Beidou besides my very first 4-star ever, other than, of course, Noelle? Well, Beidou is a Claymore-wielding Electro user who is Ningguang's chess partner. I'm doing air quotes that you can't see. And in this video, we are going to look at the basics of Beidou. Now, Beidou's normal attacks are going to be fairly normal. They're going to do physical damage. They are going to be a little slower just because she's a Claymore user. But then her charge attack is actually going to be like the 5-star version of the charge attack, where it's not going to be the Beyblade. She's going to actually swing back and forth like Dia or Eula. And now we're going to look at her skill. Now, her skill is going to do a couple of different things, or it's going to work a couple of different ways. First, if we just tap it, it is going to do an instance of electro damage. It's going to swing the Claymore around, dealing electro damage. Now, if we hold it down, it is going to absorb damage whenever Beidou is hit. It is going to kind of create this shield, quote unquote shield, as long as you're holding it down. Once Beidou has been hit, you can release it, and it is going to do a lot more damage because she has been hit. Now, Beidou also does have a passive. It's actually her first passive called Retribution, where if you do a counter attack, where you hit it as soon as Beidou takes damage at the precise moment when Beidou takes damage, then it is going to grant the maximum damage bonus from holding it down. So instead of having to hold it down, if you time the counter attack correctly, then she is going to do the maximum damage. So as you're going to see here, you're going to see like a little bit of 5,000, 19,000, and then like 22,000 or more whenever we get this correct counter attack with Tide Collar. Now, her second passive is going to actually increase the damage of her normal and charged attack and the speed of these attacks after you have used Tide Collar with its maximum damage bonus. So after you do the counter attack, then you get an increase in normal and charge attack damage and an increase in normal and charge attack speed, which is very, very good because of how that's going to work with her burst if you're going to run her on field. Also great, it's going to also reduce the delay before unleashing the charge attack. So it's just faster overall. Now, speaking of her burst, if we use her burst, it is going to do an instance of electro damage, but then whenever your on-field character, yes, Beidou's burst does work even when she's not on the field, when they do a normal or charge attack, it is going to send out Beidou's burst, dealing electro damage. Now, if there are multiple enemies, it is actually going to bounce around the enemies. There is a constellation that is going to allow it to bounce to more enemies, but it is going to bounce around and hit multiple enemies. So her burst works phenomenally well when you have more enemies. So in groups of enemies, her burst is going to work very, very well. It's going to bounce around and hit a lot of enemies. Now, something else that you're going to notice is that my Beidou does have a shield whenever she uses her burst. That is also a constellation. If you don't have that, then just kind of move past it. It's not a super, super great shield. You don't necessarily build Beidou HP. You still build her for damage, but it's just a little bit extra, right? It's just kind of like a little bit of shield, kind of like Yanfei or Tankfei, who's going to have her own video later on as well. Now, if we were to use like Beidou's burst, in this case with Alhaitham, then this is going to be great because we're going to get quicken, spread, and aggravate reactions between just Alhaitham being on field and Beidou being off field. So this particular team that you're seeing right now is going to be a quick bloom team where Beidou is going to be using her burst, taking her back off the field, letting Alhaitham come on the field, and attacking the enemies for those spread and aggravate reactions that Beidou is going to be able to use and Alhaitham is going to be able to use. So before we get into her artifacts and weapons, I do want to talk about Beidou being a Hyperbloom trigger. In this team, as you can see, we do have Farina, Alhaitham, and Beidou. That is the 3 elements needed for Hyperblooms. I have had a lot of people ask about like Beidou and or Fischl being Hyperbloom triggers. Now, Beidou is not a good Hyperbloom trigger. Her E, her skill, can trigger Hyperblooms, and the initial hit from her burst can trigger Hyperblooms. The lightning kind of bouncing around does not count as triggering the Hyperblooms. It will not make contact with the Hyperblooms. It will not trigger the Hyperblooms. So Beidou herself being a Hyperbloom trigger, she cannot be one outside of her E and the initial hit from her Q. Fischl is not a good one for a different reason, and I'll talk about that in a different video, but Beidou is not a good Hyperbloom trigger. However, her not being a good Hyperbloom trigger is actually great for this example team right here, being Alhaitham, Beidou, Kuki Shinobu, and Farina, because that means that Kuki Shinobu, who is full EM build with Deep Woods on her, will trigger every single Hyperbloom that is put out. We don't have to worry about Beidou being a full EM build. We can build her normally with crit and electro damage, while Kuki will proc all of the Hyperblooms because that's what Kuki does amazingly. With Farina being a super, super slow or inconsistent Hydro Applicator. This is a quick bloom team with Alhaitham and Beidou getting the quick in aggravate reactions, getting the quick in reactions and then allowing them to do spread and aggravate without triggering any of the Hyperblooms. That way Kuki can trigger the Hyperblooms, who is full EM build, so that way we get the most damage out of all of this. So Beidou not triggering Hyperblooms is actually to her benefit in this particular team. I did just want to throw that in there. I've had a lot of people ask about Beidou being a Hyperbloom trigger. So now let's look at artifacts. For this specific team, we are running Emblem. Beidou is very, very energy hungry, so we need to have as much energy recharge as we can on her. So we are going to be running an EM Sands, an Electro Goblet, and then a crit rate or crit damage circlet, most likely a crit rate, kind of depending on the weapon. Now, another option that you do have for artifacts, it would be like a 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece Glad, but still Emblem is going to be very, very good for her, because especially if you're using her burst as her main source of damage, then Emblem is going to be her best. Now for weapons, we are using Wolf's Gravestone, which is one of her best. Even in this team, we can still use Wolf's Gravestone very, very well. This is going to get up attack, and then it's going to increase attack even more, and then it's going to increase attack even more once you've hit an enemy with less than 30% HP. This is a phenomenal weapon for Beidou to get as a ton of attack on her, and the red really, really goes with her. Like, that looks really, really good. Then, of course, you do have something like Beacon of the Reed Sea, which Beacon of the Reed Sea is just kind of good on everybody. It's going to get up crit rate, and then after their skill hits an opponent, it's going to increase their attack. And then after they take damage, it's going to increase their attack again, right? So you get a ton of attack. The HP is not really going to be a big thing with Beidou. Obviously, she's going to put a shield on her, so that's going to just kind of get rid of that HP. That's not really going to matter much. It's really going to be the crit rate and then the double attack. So this is a phenomenal weapon for Beidou. Even though she cannot trigger Hyperblooms, another really good option is going to be Rain Slasher, especially in something like a Taser team or this particular team that we're running. You can also use something like Aqua Amaru. This is going to get her a ton of attack. It's going to also increase her elemental burst damage based on the combined team's burst cost. So just make sure that you're running her in a team where everybody's burst has a ton of cost to it. And then of course you do have good Ulf of Vonius, which is going to be great. It's going to give her a ton of energy recharge. This is also going to work great with Emblem, that you can just kind of get her as much energy recharge as possible. And then at this point you would definitely be running her with a crit rate circlet, so that way you can get the proc off of that. Then of course you do have Sacrificial Greatsword, which is going to give her a little bit of energy recharge, but it's also going to reset her elemental skill, which can kind of help give her more energy. Then, of course, you do have the Inazuma craftable weapon, which is going to also look great on her, by the way. It's going to give energy recharge in the main stats, and it's going to increase elemental skill damage a little bit. You can also use something like Lithic Blade, because she is from Leeway, technically, I believe. So then you can use this in a team of other Leeway users, like good old Shock Rock with Ningi and Beidou in it. There are a ton of weapons that Beidou can use. Now, Beidou is a character that I've had for a very long time. She was my original main before I ended up getting some other characters, and I do still use her from time to time. I mean, she is level 80. I don't have her own set of emblem, which I do need to work on. I do feel V staring at me through the screen, but I do not have Beidou's own set for her. That just stays on her permanently. But this is a character that I really like, and actually this team was really fun with the Alhaitham, Beidou, Kuki, and Farina. I really think that if I didn't prefer the Chiori Alhaitham team, I would be running something very, very similar to this with Alhaitham, because again, with a lot of enemies, that electricity is going to be bouncing around a ton. With singular enemies, it's not going to be as much, but with mobs and groups of enemies, Beidou is phenomenal for that. And using her in a team like this would have been very, very fun. At that point too, I'd probably take out maybe Farina and throw in like Nahida to have more aggravate reactions kind of going around, but that's kind of beside the point. This is the team that I stuck with for the video, and I very, very much enjoyed it. Now that's going to be it for this video. Kuki has green hair. I have green hair in this model, lavender hair in real life, and I will see you in the next one.